Directed by Greg Araki, I'll never forget watching Mysterious Skin for the first time and thinking to myself, hey, this is probably going to be a very fun coming-of-age flick. But after watching it, I was so petrified for how incredibly depressing and how dark it was. While it's undeniably an excellent film, it's probably one of the few you could only watch once in your life for the sake of your own well-being. Dealing with sensitive topics such as child abuse and sexuality, the movie delivers a crude depiction of the long-term effects of abuse, as the coming-of-age flick tells the two parallel stories of troubled teenagers who share a dark past, with Joseph Gordon-Levitt as the character Neil, a hustler who secretly offers services as a sex worker, and Brian, a nerdy young man who believes that he was abducted by aliens when he was a kid. While Mysterious Skin may serve as a very heartbreaking experience for some film lovers out there, especially when it comes to discussing child abuse, which is one of the few things that's hard to incorporate into movies, but thanks to Greg Araki's direction, it is done so here with impressive grace as a well-made and thought-provoking coming-of-age film that goes to show you that even throughout the darkest times in your life, there remains a light at the end of the tunnel, showing you that trauma is something that you can eventually overcome. If I could name one movie that I instantly loved on the first viewing, it's without question Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Into the Spider-Verse is an endlessly creative, visually jaw-dropping, and groundbreaking animated comic book movie that has such a beautiful story about a band of misfits finding strength together. From the pitch-perfect soundtrack to the stunning animation style that matches the feel of a comic book being brought to life, Into the Spider-Verse is such an absolute pure joy to watch every time, as it not only manages to be one of the greatest comic book movies of all time, but also one of the greatest anime movies of all time as well. To any of y'all who are longtime viewers on my channel, y'all should know that I'm a huge lover of coming-of-age stories. Directed by Francis Ford Coppola, The Outsiders is a cult classic film for people of a certain age, as it contains a certain amount of class and is faithful to its source novel by S.C. Hinton. It also features a ridiculous amount of big names in Hollywood, from the late great Patrick Swayze, Matt Dillon, Tom Cruise, Rob Lowe, C. Thomas Howell, Ralph Macchio, Emilio Estevez, and Diane Lane. It's a film that has a lot to say about loyalty and friendship among kids, as it deals with class differences, and your heart will be with the greasers, whom all have endured hard lives and must adapt to that, especially Ponyboy and his two brothers, who have endured an awful amount of heartache and turmoil. With the entire cast giving all wonderful performances, The Outsiders still stands the test of time as a moving drama about troubled teenagers. Coming from one of the most beloved production companies worldwide, Studio Ghibli, The Boy and the Heron is an exciting blend of reality and magic while presenting the genre of coming of age in a very unique way. Serving as the definitive swan song of Hayao Miyazaki, the film is a vibrant, imaginative, gorgeously crafted, and wildly unpredictable romp following a 12-year-old boy named Mahito, grieving the mysterious death of his mother, who embarks on a journey of self-discovery after being swept into a whimsical fantasy realm brimming with otherworldly creatures. It's a huge shift from traditional animated features that I've ever seen, because as it rejects simple explanations, Hayao Miyazaki compels the audience to ponder and be mystified with all of his conceptual manifestations. Just as the protagonist is navigating his own grief with a limited juvenile comprehension, we too are left to navigate a series of emotions and visual tapestries that we do not fully understand. Even though The Boy and the Heron may not be ranked as one of the strongest Studio Ghibli movies, it's overall a beautiful film that serves as a worthy conclusion to one of the greatest filmographies in the history of cinema. It's raw, it's vulnerable, thought-provoking, and overall, I'm very eager to see how it'll age over time. Out of all the movies of the Toy Story franchise, Toy Story 2 has always been my favorite. Following up one of the most beloved and most groundbreaking animated movies of all time was not going to be an easy challenge, but somehow, someway, Toy Story 2 made it look so effortless, from deepening the friendship between Woody and Buzz, whilst also introducing instant classic characters such as Jessie and Bullseye, as well as Stinky Pete, voiced by Kelsey Grammer. I really adore how the movie wasn't afraid to go to more challenging emotional places, most notably when it came to looking at the heartbreaking backstory of Jessie, which was a real tearjerker. Toy Story 2 overall was such a magnificent follow-up to the first Toy Story, but also adds even more depth and fleshes out all the characters further, while also retaining everything the audiences loved about the original. It's undoubtedly one of the greatest movie sequels of all time. When it comes to discussing some of the best slow burn romance films of all time, Joe Wright's iteration of Pride and Prejudice is always brought in conversation, and understandably so. It's like the perfect film to put on when you're just wanting to sit back, relax, and drink some nice coffee too, because it's such a comforting experience. Based on the iconic novel by Jane Austen, it illustrates the complex love story between the single, wealthy, and proud Mr. Darcy, played by Matthew Macfadyen, and Elizabeth Bennet, played by Keira Knightley, a woman below his class whom he begins to fall in love with. With a sweeping score and breathtaking cinematography, this beloved period film explores whether the two can overcome his pride and her prejudice. It's not remotely hard to understand the appeal of this romantic tale, as it deals with themes of family, marriage, and misconceptions, not to mention a stellar supporting cast, including the recently deceased Donald Sutherland as Mr. Bennet. Overall, Pride and Prejudice is such an absorbing romantic tale that will have you invested in the gradual growing relationship between two believable and complex characters with stunning visuals and amazing acting performances to match. Any of y'all who are longtime viewers who know who I am and know what I like and dislike, musicals, for the most part, are never usually my cup of tea when it comes to movie genres. However, upon watching the original West Side Story from 1961, I was so surprised how much I would love this movie. While the 2021 remake directed by Steven Spielberg was very solid for what it was, the original is the one that takes the cake for me due to its cultural and cinematic impact. Based on the 1957 Broadway play and taking inspiration from the classic Shakespearean tragedy Romeo and Juliet, the film tells a gripping story about two star-crossed lovers, Tony and Maria, as they instantly fall in love with each other. Despite this movie doing a great job with the organic love that blossoms between the two characters, it also makes it clear that their relationship is bound to be a failure due to Tony being one of the co-founders of the Jets and Maria being the sister of the Sharks' leader, Bernardo. The film is shot and presented in such grand fashion, featuring impeccable choreography, memorable tunes, and a show-stealing performance with the amazing Rita Moreno as Anita. Aside from being a perfect fit for those who are into gripping, melodramatic musicals about forbidden romance, this iteration of West Side Story is such a cultural landmark that was such a well-executed piece of filmmaking, as it superbly explores themes of class, love, prejudice, and societal divisions in such an intriguing manner. Out of all the films that Tim Burton has directed, Big Fish has always been my favorite. While he's made some other films that are very moving, such as Edward Scissorhands or even Corpse Bride, Big Fish is the one that has always struck a chord with me. With a strained father-son relationship at its center, the tale of grief and love chronicles the life of Edward Bloom, whom is both phenomenally portrayed by the late great Albert Finney as the elderly version of Edward, along with Ewan McGregor lighting up the screen as his youthful counterpart. The beauty of Big Fish, beyond its colorful cinematography and imagery, is not only found in the story of a father and a son's struggle to understand and accept each other, but also the way how Tim Burton masterfully blends fantasy and reality. A cozy film about morality, legacy, and the enduring desire to know where we come from before we know where we're going. Big Fish is such an enchanting and heartwarming tale that never fails to make me shed a tear. Stanley Kubrick, to many film lovers, is widely considered to be the greatest filmmaker of all time. And by looking at his resume of all the incredible films that he's directed throughout his career, it's really not hard to see why, because there's too many to choose from. The Shining, Paths of Glory, Dr. Strangelove, Barry Lyndon, and even Full Metal Jacket. However, when it came to choosing my favorite Stanley Kubrick film, it's Eyes Wide Shut, followed by A Clockwork Orange, just by a few notches. Serving as the final movie from the legendary director, Kubrick's Eyes Wide Shut is a masterwork of paranoia, starring Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman as a married couple, which is funny enough considering the fact that they were married at the time, making this movie all the more interesting. The film tells the story about a sexually frustrated marriage as a doctor who feels utterly betrayed by his wife after she confesses to having sexual fantasies about other men, and embarks on a journey traveling all across New York City, which eventually leads him into a mysterious underground secret society. A film all about obsession, sex, marriage, and psychological torment. Tom Cruise's performance in this movie is nothing short of great, as the perspective of his character, Dr. Bill Harford, is shared with the viewer, as they're both drawn into the mystery of a secret sexual society that goes to great lengths to silence outsiders. Throughout the film's runtime, we see Dr. Harford fall into a downward spiral of jealousy over something that never happened, but Stanley Kubrick did such a phenomenal job of making it clear that this was a marriage that had plenty of cracks at the beginning of the film, so the exploration of Bill and Alice's relationship remains a fascinating aspect of the story. Overall, Eyes Wide Shut is a movie that is so deeply layered, and perhaps it's only fitting that Stanley Kubrick's last present to filmgoers was both a mystery that can never be resolved and somewhat of a self-reflective commentary. Now, I love me a good heist movie. Coming off the success of making back-to-back movies from Aaron Brockovich and Traffic, Steven Soderbergh recruited a star-studded cast full of A-list movie stars such as the likes of George Clooney, Brad Pitt, Julia Roberts, Matt Damon, Andy Garcia, Don Cheadle, Casey Affleck, Bernie Mac, and Carl Reiner to remake the 1960 classic Frank Sinatra caper Ocean's 11. The heist thriller blows the original Rat Pack out of the water in every way, but it also never feels like a direct remake, just a great movie in its own right. It's a movie full of glamour that always maintain its sense of fun while still being intriguing and intelligent. It's a movie that's impeccably stylish, embodying the glitz of Las Vegas, but it also has the substance to support the movie. From the phenomenal cast, the frantic pace, the quirky dialogue, the superb direction, and a soundtrack that suits the carefree mood perfectly, Ocean's 11 was Steven Soderbergh at the height of his dazzling movie-making powers, filling the screen with big names, but also showing us in detail the planning, the execution, and the aftermath of the heist on top of all the drama, and jovial infighting in between. Based on the 1989 comic book series of the same name by James O'Barr, The Crow tells the tale of an edgy musician, Eric Draven, who's resurrected from the dead, whom is bound to seek vengeance against a gang who murdered him and his fiancée with the help of a police officer played by Ernie Hudson. The horror action genre aspects are so dazzling, with having some real visual flair in its fight scenes, as well as an impressive overall gothic aesthetics. Not to mention the fact that Brandon Lee did such a superb job of portraying the character of Eric Draven, who comes off so real, yet so very vulnerable. It just makes it even more depressing that he died during the film's production, literally a week before it was set to end. Despite the onset tragedy during the film's production of Brandon Lee, The Crow was and still remains a cult classic that deserves every ounce of recognition and praise it gets. Very few modern films have left such a lasting mark on the zeitgeist as Get Out. Simply put, Jordan Peele's debut project is a monolithic horror masterpiece that only seems to get better and better with every revisit. The movie is like an onion. It has so many layers upon layers of meaning and symbolism, as I always notice new things every time I watch it. It's as rich in textures as a great novel, and while most great horror films draw back to the curtain and shine a light on the darkest aspects of human nature, very few films do it as ingeniously as Get Out does. It's a near perfect piece of cinema that reaches heights few other horror films have ever reached, and it's definitely one of the finest films in the genre, not just of the 21st century, but also of all time. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a film that needs no introduction. Widely regarded as the greatest Western of all time, it's everything you could ask for in a film that defines cinema. When three outlaws learn of a buried treasure, they do their best to outwit and outlast one another to be the final cowboy standing and claim their prize, while the American Civil War unfolds in the background. Serving as the final entry in Sergio Leone's Dollars trilogy, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is a must-watch for anybody who loves spaghetti westerns, as there's not a single flaw to find in this timeless classic, from the complex camera work, thrilling gunfights, and most importantly, one of the most iconic scores of all time from the late Ennio Morricone. A film that is so thoroughly creative through and through, Run Lola Run remains a remarkable and innovative cinematic experience that explores the concept of fate, chance, and the impact of small decisions on the course of one's life. Praised for reinventing the ticking clock trope and for incorporating chaos theory assiduously in its screenplay, the film centers around a young punk named Lola who quickly has to obtain a lot of money to save the life of her boyfriend Manny. Run Lola Run to me feels like a video game come to life, even though it's not based off a video game, as the film presents three different scenarios, each with slight variations, and shows how Lola's choices in a matter of seconds can lead to drastically different outcomes. It's a film that always keeps me on the edge of my seat and encourages reflection on the interconnectedness of life's events. Oh goody, another Studio Ghibli movie on my list. 3 years after the release of Studio Ghibli's most recognizable and critically acclaimed hit, Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle is nothing short of amazing, as the film is all about a romance and an almost impossible quest when you have an 18-year-old soft-spoken young lady named Sophie, whom can't seem to find a spark in her day-to-day life until she stumbles upon Howl Pendragon, a mysterious but yet a powerful young wizard who may have it all, but much like Sophie, he has trouble defining his own identity. Made in response for his distaste for the 2003 Iraq War. Hayao Miyazaki's epic fantasy touches on several key Ghibli themes, from pacifism to morality, and uses them to create a harrowing portrait of how the consequences of war can inflict on people, most particularly children. But even with all of that, Miyazaki also presents Howl's Moving Castle as a beautiful story that'll not only make you learn to love yourself, but also a film that'll make you root for flawed characters whom eventually fall in love with each other. The centerpiece of $1 Million Baby is three performances that give it life. A story about an aspiring boxer taken in by an emotionally closed-off trainer and his closest confidant. It finds Hilary Swank, Clint Eastwood, and Morgan Freeman at the absolute peak of their powers. Directed by Eastwood himself, the sports drama is a humanist tale about perseverance and redemption, acceptance and missed opportunities, following Hilary Swank as Maggie Fitzgerald, who scales the grumpy defenses of Frankie Dunn, played by Eastwood, and Morgan Freeman, who portrays Frankie's best friend Scrap, who watches in pain as the pair save and then inadvertently destroy each other. On paper, $1 Million Baby does seem like your average boxing movie about a grumpy veteran trainer who takes on a young fighter who changes his worldview, but it's a lot more than that, as it tackles gender discrimination while beautifully exploring each character's past through setting and dialogue, to the way its final act shifts from being an underdog story to a heartbreaking tragedy. Earning its tears, Clint Eastwood's late career gem is one of the Academy's most devastating Best Picture winners, wrapping you in a warm hug before it finally breaks your heart. Although Blade Runner's initial reviews weren't well received upon its release back in 1982, this sci-fi classic has grown more popular and has gained more appreciation over time, to the point where now it's one of the most acclaimed movies of all time, and deservedly so. My absolute favorite aspect of Blade Runner is how elegantly and intelligently it explores the concept of quote-unquote humanity. Between the perfect vision of the dilapidated futuristic world the characters inhabit, to Roy Batty's iconic Tears in the Rain monologue in the final act, the movie manages to maintain its sci-fi thriller credentials whilst also crafting a deeply philosophical story about humanism and morality. Overall, Blade Runner is undoubtedly one of the most timeless movies of all time, as it solidified Ridley Scott as one of the best filmmakers of his generation, and for my money, this is his magnum opus. Evil Dead 2 superbly captures everything that made the first movie so brilliant, but it cranked things all the way up to 11. It also brings comedy into the forefront in a way that the franchise would adopt wholeheartedly, making this easily the most well-balanced between horror and comedy the franchise has ever produced. This is also the movie that birthed the Ash Williams that we all know and love. While Bruce Campbell's character certainly shined in the first film, this was the film that turned him into the wild, raving, captivating madman that he had become. Overall, Evil Dead 2 launched the series into even greater cult classic status, as it has the horror, the violence, the comedy, and most importantly, Ash. The movie is just the purest form of the Evil Dead's best elements. If you were to look for the perfect movie to Netflix and chill to, look no further than Alfonso Cuarón's Y tu mamá también, a marvelous coming-of-age story that follows two best buddies named Julio and Tinoch, whom both persuade a beautiful older woman named Luisa to accompany them on a road trip across Mexico. But what makes Y tu mamá también so compelling is the overall tone of the film. The one thing that this movie does successfully well that most coming-of-age movies fail to do these days is their depiction of sex, as they tend to highly romanticize the experience teenagers have in the act. But with this movie, the sexual tension always feels natural to the development of the story, and this is thanks both to the nuanced script written by the director himself, Alfonso Cuarón, and the raw, charismatic performances from Diego Luna, Gael Garcia Bernal, and Maribel Verdú. Even with Y tu mamá también having some aspects that are a bit depressing to watch at times, there's nothing like watching genuinely beautiful people seduce one another to put you in the mood for a bit of the old nasty, if you know what I mean. Now, way before there was the Avengers, there was X2 X-Men United, one of the best installments of the Fox X-Men movies. X2 has aged gracefully like a fine glass of red wine. While the first X-Men movie from 2000 deserves all the credit in the world for shaping the modern superhero movie genre for what it is today, but when it came to the sequel, it continued the social allegories that had been introduced from its predecessor for another study of discrimination. There's more of a genuine moral issue at the heart of the story. X2 is such a thrilling escalation of the Fox X-Men movies, featuring a handful of incredible scenes, from Nightcrawler's attack on the White House in the opening scene, to Wolverine unleashing his wrath during the raid on the X-Mansion, even the major cliffhanger with Jean Grey sacrificing herself to save the X-Men, teasing the Dark Phoenix storyline, and my personal favorite is when Nightcrawler scholar reveals himself as a mutant to his parents, which is kind of like a reflection of how a teenage boy would come out gay to his family. X2 X-Men United truly feels like the type of comic book movie that people don't really make anymore, which only makes it more rewatchable for me. It's hectic, fast-paced, and generally thought-provoking, a rare blend that works all together to create something unique. Heathers is a movie that's way ahead of its time. I'll never forget watching it a couple years back for the first time, and it was so eye-opening to me. At a time when the late John Hughes was dominating the 80s by revolutionizing the teen coming-of-age genre with colorful characters and happy endings, Heathers felt a lot more different from that, as the film offers a masterclass in cynical and subversive dark comedy. This dark comedy classic follows Winona Ryder as Veronica Sawyer, a student who's a part of a very popular clique along with 4 girls called the Heathers. As Veronica grows to miss her old life when she wasn't popular, she completely leaves the Heathers as she grows tired of their cruel behavior, as she comes across a mysterious new kid, JD, played by Christian Slater. When Veronica meets JD, they instantly fall for each other by becoming an inseparable couple, and devise a twisted plot that will rid of all the popular kids at their high school. Initially, things seem to be going well between the two characters. However, things eventually spiral out of control once Veronica realizes that JD is a complete sociopath when his plan escalates to full-blown murder. Despite being a box office flop upon its release, Heathers would eventually become a cult film of significant acclaim. For more than 3 decades, the indelible mark that Heathers left on teen media has been truly unmatched, as it forever changed the way how teenagers were portrayed in pop culture. Movies like Clueless, Jawbreaker, Cruel Intentions, Mean Girls, as well as TV shows like Euphoria, Gossip Girl, Pretty Little Liars, and even Scream Queens owes its lineage to Heathers, as it still feels modern and relevant thanks in no small part to its inventive dialogue. The Prestige is the most essential film to unlock Christopher Nolan, the filmmaker. It speaks to his overall philosophy when it comes to storytelling, and its themes that are prevalent in nearly every single one of his films. It tells the story about 2 magicians played by Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, how they initially start off being very good friends, to being bitter rivals, which leads on a lifelong battle for supremacy. With the themes of obsession and sacrifices, Christopher Nolan did such an outstanding job of showing how their toxic hatred for each other not only affects them, but the people around them. From the cinematography, the brilliant screenwriting, and the impeccable cast of actors, including a cameo from the late great David Bowie, The Prestige is a movie that smartly keeps its cards pressed firmly to its chest, and overall it's an underrated classic. Days of Heaven has to be the most beautiful movie I've ever witnessed, given for its dazzling cinematography. Directed by Terrence Malick, the story of the film takes place in the year 1916, centering around a young couple who pretend to be siblings so they can swindle a wealthy farm owner out of his fortune, with a fraudulent marriage undertaken as a way to gain the money of the landowner as he's on the verge of dying with his terminal illness. Well, sure, you may call Days of Heaven just a very typical tragic love triangle, but it's also much more than that, as it goes beyond being a simple romantic melodrama, taking on a unique feel thanks to its presentation, undeniable beauty, and uncommon use of narration. From the spectacular visuals from cinematographer Nestor Elamandros and the beautiful score composed by Ennio Morricone, Days of Heaven makes for an emotional and thematically rich viewing experience. One of the most exhilarating action movies of the 21st century, Mad Max Fury Road is a thrilling exercise in action movie making, and also a huge reminder of how not everything has to be CGI to work on the big screen. After spending over 30 years in development hell, George Miller's post-apocalyptic epic finally made its way to audiences in 2015, and man oh man how surprisingly phenomenal it turned out to be. Not only is it a movie that managed to exceed expectations, but it also managed to completely surpass all of the previous Mad Max movies out of the water, especially when you have 2 fantastic lead protagonists led by Tom Hardy as Max Rokitansky and Charlize Theron's incredible performance as the heroine badass herself, Imperator Furiosa. Set across one lone continuous car chase, the movie is almost non-stop action with very little dialogue, but yet it still manages to convey a compelling story and portray its characters effectively. Even though I'm a guy who's never really considered myself the biggest lover of war films outside of like possibly Black Hawk Down, but when it came to David Ayer's Fury, it's the one that has always stood out to me the most. Despite facing endless criticism throughout his career, David Ayer confidently demonstrates his love for cinema with this eerie picture that draws on both genre conventions and the lyricism of human interactions. Brad Pitt may be the lead role as the tank commander, and Shia LaBeouf may have been the one who have got all the press attention as he masterfully showcased his insane method acting, but in the end, Fury belongs to Logan Lerman as the character Norman, who is beyond striking as the inexperienced newcomer to the tank, who slowly loses his innocence and potentially his mind. It's a story of nihilism and the twisted kind of brotherhood that forms in the face of ceaseless violence, and David Ayer certainly doesn't shy away from the blood in this film. Just in terms of literal filth, Fury may be one of the most striking war films that fully conveys the stain, literal and metal of such conflict. Serving as a remake of the 2002 Hong Kong movie Internal Affairs, The Departed is vintage Martin Scorsese effortlessly made. The film takes you on a thrill ride of two moles, Leonardo DiCaprio and Matt Damon, on the other side of the law, as both face double crosses, moral decay, gunfights, conspiracy, and murder alongside a host of compelling co-stars, including Jack Nicholson in his last great performance as Frank Costello, and Mark Wahlberg, who completely steals the entire movie as Sergeant Dignam, with an ensemble cast and a twisting tale of crime and corruption. The Departed is about everything that you want from a cop thriller, as Scorsese crafts a story so rife with bolts from the blue, finding a way to be at once bleak, unpredictable, and intensely rewatchable. Love him or hate him, Quentin Tarantino is a fucking genius. A couple things you can always guarantee from the guy is that he really knows how to make a great script and impress his audience with his unique characters and his screenplays. Even though True Romance may have not been directed by Tarantino, it pretty much has all the elements of what makes all of his movies so great. It has the guns, the intriguing characters, the dialogue, the pop culture references, and the superb acting. On top of that, the film is packed with such an incredible cast, including Christopher Walken, the late James Gandolfini, Gary Oldman, who gives one of his best performances, Samuel L. Jackson, Brad Pitt, and the late Dennis Hopper. However, this romantic, gritty crime thriller follows Christian Slater and Patricia Arquette as star-crossed lovers named Clarence and Alabama, whom have such remarkable chemistry with each other as one of the cutest couples in the history of cinema, as they get mixed up in some shady business and wind up in possession of a duffel bag full of cash. True Romance may have been a huge commercial box office flop, but with this film having such an intriguing Bonnie and Clyde-esque plot, along with a phenomenal score from the great Hans Zimmer, it eventually became an enduring cult classic among pop culture savvy viewers, and is now one of my all-time favorite romance flicks. We're always going to need those comedies that give us a good laugh whenever we're having a shitty day or whenever we're in a foul mood. And for me personally, that's when I always turn on the 1994 hit comedy classic Dumb and Dumber, directed by the Farrelly brothers. Dumb and Dumber is a movie that magnificently combines screwball comedy, criminal intrigue, and even hopeful romance into a wholly unique comedic package. Not to mention the remarkable chemistry between Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels, who made such a perfect match because of the way they play off each other so well. The charm of this film lies in the delightful ignorance of best buddies Lloyd and Harry, whose personality simply doesn't allow for a light bulb moment. With having a plot that is very stupid, yet very lighthearted and funny, as two best buddies get caught up in a kidnapping heist without even knowing that they're literally being hunted down by not just killers, but also cops. Dumb and Dumber is just a movie that I could rewatch endlessly until the end of time because of how mindless the plot is and how great Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels are as a pair. One of the best action movies of the 21st century, The Bourne Ultimatum is a show-stopping spectacle that combines the thrills, the emotion, and the intelligence that made the entire Bourne trilogy so unique. With this movie being the third and easily the best of the Bourne series, The Bourne Ultimatum is everything that an action movie should be. Following the death of his girlfriend Marie in The Bourne Supremacy, Jason Bourne is still on the hunt for the truth about his past. However, in order for Bourne to achieve that, he must avoid a ruthless CIA director who wants to take him down once and for all, as he goes on a path towards justice by exposing the program that spawned him. With a combination of Matt Damon giving it his all as the character of Jason Bourne, and with Paul Greengrass's direction at his most seamless, the movie alone has the most explosive, expertly constructed action and earth-shattering revelations of the entire Bourne series. The Bourne Ultimatum finally provided the answers that the trilogy had been culminating towards, from identity and supremacy, and overall it was such an excellent wrap-up to Jason Bourne's past. Or at least we thought it was. If it wasn't for the 2016 Jason Bourne movie, oh goodness me. Now, for those who've been following my channel for quite some time should know that this is unquestionably my favorite romance movie of all time. A rare remake that surpasses its source material, Bradley Cooper's A Star is Born is such a beautiful exploration of love, music, and chasing your dreams. The film has such an inspiring soundtrack full of great songs, a generous pace, and two immeasurably remarkable performances from Bradley Cooper and Lady Gaga. The chemistry between Gaga and Cooper was just absolutely outstanding, as their respective characters, Jackson and Ally Main, organically fall for each other, as it came off so believable, showcasing the beauty but also the vulnerabilities of their relationship. Like seriously, those two were so great together that if they were a real-life couple, I would be fully convinced. The movie feels like a genuine love letter to the entertainment industry just as much as it is a vicious screed against it, portraying the whole environment as an exploitive den of selfish behavior and lifelong human sacrifice. Not to mention the heartbreaking twist ending, which I won't spoil it for you if you haven't seen it, but it also goes to show you how fame can have a negative effect on a person's well-being. A Star is Born can be depressing to watch, but yet it's also heartwarming as it has two fantastic lead performances, superb music numbers, and a story about falling in love that always makes this such a pure delight for me to watch. Now, it really should be no secret that Quentin Tarantino has always been a filmmaker heavily inspired by his favorite movies. Perhaps nowhere near is this more evident than in the Kill Bill movies, a gleefully excessive tale of revenge which mashes up everything from anime, Hong Kong action, spaghetti westerns, and the classic revenge thriller. It's also one of his few effective homages, held together by a dynamic, no-nonsense performance from Uma Thurman as the instantly iconic Beatrix Kiddo, aka the Bride. It's packed with a handful of incredible action set pieces, from the crazy 88 scene, along with the final duel with Oren Ishii, played by Lucy Liu in Volume 1, all the way to the infamous 5-point palm exploding heart technique with Michael Carradine in Volume 2. Relentlessly violent from start to finish, Kill Bill: The Whole Bloody Affair is such an exhilarating action epic that is so masterfully crafted with brilliant dialogue from the one and only Quentin Tarantino. Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men is such an extraordinary movie that I don't feel like gets talked about or receive enough praise, because to me, not only do I consider it one of the greatest sci-fi movies of the century, but also of all time. This film to me is such a masterwork of science fiction filmmaking, from the set design, the intriguing characters, the locations, the gratifying cinematography. It truly feels like it's based on a true historical location. The film follows Clive Owen as Theo Farron, whom is recruited by his ex-wife, played by Julianne Moore, to go on a dangerous mission to escort a young girl named Key, who becomes the first pregnant woman in over 20 years, and that essentially the world is out to get them and use the baby for their own benefit. While Children of Men is a movie that can be heartbreaking, riveting, depressing, but yet it's also hopeful at the same time, as it's undoubtedly one of the most intensely captivating thrillers of all time, serving as a one-of-a-kind experience as Alfonso Cuarón's masterpiece. God, I love this movie. To me, Raiders of the Lost Ark is a damn near perfect fusion of action and humor that set the standard for action-adventure movies. Back in the summer of 1981, Steven Spielberg would partner up with his buddy George Lucas as they would grace the world with one of the most iconic characters and movies of all time, with Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. To say that Raiders of the Lost Ark is the perfect action-adventure movie would be a massive understatement, because with the combination of the mind of George Lucas and the expertise of Steven Spielberg, should you expect anything less of this movie being less than extraordinary? With having no flaws to find throughout the entire film's runtime, Spielberg and Lucas managed to capture lightning in a bottle as Raiders of the Lost Ark delivered a damn near perfect story of studio filmmaking of the highest caliber that has become a timeless classic over 4 decades later. Now, the original Home Alone is a movie that needs no introduction, like, at all. I mean, come on, who hasn't seen this movie and who doesn't love it? It's one of those movies that I don't think anybody can genuinely hate, because if you do, then you need to be physically examined, because this movie fucking rules. I mean, seriously, what can I say about this movie that hasn't been said like a million times? It's always just such an absolute paradise to watch. It's always been consistently funny for me. It used to make me laugh all the time as a kid, and even at 23 years old, it still makes me laugh, which really showcases the movie's brilliance. Macaulay Culkin was just perfect as 8-year-old Kevin McAllister, who superbly captures the mixture of innocence and mischief that has defined the notoriety of his character. Meanwhile, Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern are deliciously wicked yet hilarious as the wet bandits Marv and Harry. But overall, fuck yeah. I always have and always will love the original Home Alone, so pretty much you guys get what I'm saying. The Green Mile is a movie that never fails to make me shed a tear. The Green Mile's themes of morality, justice, and judgment infuse what could be seen outwardly as a silly concept with a maturity and realism that makes the movie one of Stephen King's most beloved cinematic adaptations. The late Michael Clark Duncan was just absolutely amazing as John Coffey, a giant man who was falsely accused of killing and raping 2 young girls. Despite his huge stature, John Coffey is presented as a character who is gentle, angelic, and almost childlike figure who possesses gifts of magical healing powers. It has such a charming way of tugging at the audience's heartstrings and showing people that you shouldn't always judge a person for what they look like, but who they are as a person, and how that particular person can have a positive effect on you. Despite what seems like a depressing subject matter, the almost unearthly goodness of John Coffey creates such a touching, mysterious, and uplifting tone that is made more resonant by the seeming injustice of the conclusion of the Green Mile. I mean, what can I say about The Dark Knight that has been said already? It's a modern masterpiece, not only just of the comic book genre, but of cinema itself. Dialing up the gritty realism of Batman Begins to an almost unbearable degree, the film pits Batman not just against the Joker, but also the very concept of Gotham's hope and innocence. It's a film all about choices and fate, about the Caped Crusaders' unwavering heroism, about how one man just wants to watch the whole world burn. The Dark Knight is a film with too many layers to properly dissect here, but it plays every angle of its story to perfection. And that, of course, is without getting into the iconic performance of the late Heath Ledger, whose frighteningly entertaining portrayal of the Clown Prince of Crime is the linchpin of holding every twist of The Dark Knight together. By populating the film with authentic characters and action, Christopher Nolan had created a film that stretches beyond the superhero genre into simply being a great movie. Even with The Dark Knight being released 15 years ago, the comic book genre is still lingering in this film's shadow. Man, oh man, I love Shrek 2. For me personally, it's the best example of being a perfect sequel. While the first Shrek movie is an undisputed classic, a movie that has been a huge staple on pop culture for over 2 decades, it's very quotable and it's endlessly rewatchable. But I generally prefer the second one just a tad bit more and personally think it's superior to the first. It took everything of what made the first movie so great by expanding upon it with introducing new characters like Puss in Boots, voiced by Antonio Banderas, and an excellent villain in the Fairy Godmother. The soundtrack to Shrek 2 is absolutely amazing as each song perfectly fits with each scene it's played in, and the movie does such an incredible job of exploring the hardships of Shrek and Fiona's marriage, showcasing how much the two truly love each other. Oh, and I cannot talk about this movie without mentioning the amazing third act of the cover of Holding Out for a Hero. That entire sequence represents cinema at its peak. It's hard to put it in words how truly fantastic Deathly Hallows Part 2 was at achieving its main goal, ending the Harry Potter franchise in the most satisfying way possible. There was a lot at stake both in the fight for survival, but also in the amount of pressure on a finale to live up to expectations, and an exhilarating, brilliantly emotional, and masterfully crafted finale that ties everything up in an entirely satisfying way. Deathly Hallows Part 2 is both an unforgettably epic, badass action extravaganza, and a thoroughly effective showcase of sublime emotional storytelling. A good portion of this movie may be a dark, haunting, and frequently heartbreaking viewing experience, but nonetheless, it's also a movie full of bliss and uproarious thrills that lead to a wonderfully thrilling ending that'll have viewers shedding tears of joy. While many other franchises have tried and failed miserably when it comes to sticking the landing, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2 will always shine brightly as an exemplary ending to a much beloved story, as well as the greatest franchise ending of all time. American Honey is a movie all about its characters. The story revolves around those who end up on the wrong end of the spectrum in capitalist society, with Sasha Lane as the character star, the main protagonist, an 18-year-old girl who escapes her abusive home life and goes on a journey looking for a place and purpose in the world. While there's no traditional plot, the search for self and community is more than enough to keep the audience glued to their screens throughout. Sasha Lane, Shia LaBeouf, and Riley Keough were all amazing in this movie as they all deliver performances that feel so authentic, so real, and so personal. It's almost as if we were watching as a friend going through the trials and tribulations. Overall, American Honey is a movie that is narratively audacious, picaresque pageant of youth, and an exhilarating spectacle that deserves more attention. One of the most influential movies of all time, Taxi Driver is an exploration about the ramifications of isolation. It's one of cinema's greatest character studies that follows a Vietnam War veteran turned cab driver Travis Bickle in a nightmarish grimy New York as he becomes detached from reality and fantasizes saving a young prostitute from her troubled life. The story has some pretty profound things to say what happens to a person when they become trapped within the confines of their own mind for an overextended period of time. Despite the movie featuring a madman as its protagonist, I never felt entirely removed from sympathizing with his intentions. Robert De Niro's complex performance as Bickle may be the highlight of the entire film, but so is Martin Scorsese's direction and his ability to craft such a menacing masterpiece. Taxi Driver is ugly, but is flawlessly violent, and is Scorsese's masterpiece, and in my opinion, slightly better than Goodfellas. Come at me. Ah yes, my favorite foreign movie of all time. I'll never forget coming across City of God for the first time, and I remember just being glued to it from the opening scene all the way to the ending. It may be a film that may be difficult to watch, but it's also one of the richest and most rewarding. The Brazilian crime drama follows two young boys growing up in a favela in Rio de Janeiro, where they encounter crime, murder, and sadism that forces them to take radically different paths in life. The film aesthetics are astonishing and worthy of a classic. All the characters are very richly interesting, and their path is kept on beyond the film itself. While it may not be for the faint of heart, City of God is a brutal, uncompromising drama of any lover of cinema has to see with their own two eyes. It's pretty damn good. David Fincher's gritty detective neo-noir flick is such a timeless classic. Anybody who's a fan of his work should know that he's a master when it comes to making thrillers. What I really love about Seven is that it takes a classic neo-noir detective genre and infuses it with a sense of horror. This is a film that is chilling to the bone from start to finish, and it has some of the most gruesome imagery of its kind. Knowing the aftermath of the killings that Brad Pitt and Morgan Freeman investigate told it all, and it gave me a creative imagination of the scene of what it looked like during those crimes that were committed by John Doe. It also has one of the most memorable and iconic third acts in cinema history with the infamous What's in the Box sequence. Every single thing about that sequence was just pitch perfect. From the camera work, the background music, and especially how it beautifully took time to develop intensity, leading to one of the most haunting conclusions of all time. Nothing about Seven falls short of a masterpiece, which is why it is a must-watch for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, because trust me, it is that damn brilliant. One of the most defining masterpieces in David Lynch's career, Blue Velvet is a disturbing neo-noir mystery which uncovers a violent undertone to an American suburb which appears idyllic on the surface. The film follows a college student who returns home to visit his parents, but when he does, he discovers a severed human ear, and because of it, he discovers a vast criminal conspiracy involving a tortured lounge singer. In the grand scheme of Lynch's work, Blue Velvet can be considered more provocative than confusing. It has some quintessential elements of surrealism that will make you wonder, but everything can be deduced with symbols relating back to the themes of voyeurism and sexual obsession. With a masterful soundtrack and a terrifying yet terrific performance by the late Dennis Hopper as the main villain, Blue Velvet is a movie that excellently explores a surreal suburban Americana with an extraordinary visual style. Gloriously outrageous and hilariously over the top, Martin Scorsese's vulgar and exciting adaptation of Jordan Belfort's unbelievable autobiography sees Leonardo DiCaprio in a role of a stockbroker whose life descends into madness due to drugs, money laundering schemes, FBI investigations, and even more drugs. DiCaprio excels as Belfort, who is a complete douchebag, but a douchebag who fills the screen up with so much energy and confidence that it's very impossible not to root for the guy. With Leo DiCaprio giving possibly the best performance of his career, he combines physical comedy with vein-popping rage and arrogance, and Scorsese just lets him run wild. With the excellent creative partnership between Leo DiCaprio and Martin Scorsese, The Wolf of Wall Street is just an absolute blast to watch. For a guy like me who has always been a huge sucker for happy endings, Return of the Jedi has always been my favorite of the original Star Wars trilogy. While sure it may not reach the same heights as A New Hope or Empire, it's still a great movie nonetheless because make no mistake about it, it's still packed with some of the best moments of the entire Star Wars saga. The third act is easily the highlight of the entire movie where you have 3 battles all happening at once. With Lando clariously leading the charge in the space battle, the ground battle on Endor with Princess Leia, Han Solo, and Chewbacca battling the stormtroopers with the help of the Ewoks, and the best of all, the throne room sequence between Luke Skywalker, Darth Vader, and Emperor Palpatine, which is the beating heart of the entire movie. Despite some of the aspects of this movie coming out to be a little bit too silly and cartoonish, Return of the Jedi was a fantastic conclusion to the original Star Wars trilogy by tying up its loose ends and riveting character arcs with violent and heartwarming payoffs to spare. Filled with guns, excessive violence, luxurious cars, and heavy drug use, Scarface demonstrates the self-destruction of Cuban immigrant Tony Montana from his meteoric rise as a drug kingpin to his eventual downfall. Al Pacino gave one of the most unforgettable performances ever put to screen. Despite the character committing deplorable acts, director Brian De Palma did such a masterful job of making us empathize with the character of Tony Montana by perfectly illustrating a story about a ruthless underdog scratching and clawing his way to the top by achieving the American dream. It's undoubtedly one of the best gangster movies ever made, not just because of the subtlety and glamour where the others had their strengths, but for something that is superior to the others of the same genre. It's cruel, it's raw, and it's thoroughly enjoyable to watch from time to time. Few comedies have their own day dedicated to them, but Mean Girls isn't just any ordinary film. Tina Fey's script catapulted what could have been just another generic teen movie to cult status thanks to the ridiculously quotable dialogue and breakout performances from up-and-coming stars including Amanda Seyfried as Karen Smith, Rachel McAdams as Regina George, and Lindsay Lohan as the main protagonist Katie Heron. What makes Mean Girls such an enduring classic is that everybody knows it so well. Even if you're somebody who's not even the biggest lover of Mean Girls, which is basically impossible, it's almost guaranteed that you'll know at least some of the film's most iconic lines even now over 2 decades later. She doesn't even go here. Boo you whore. That's so fetch. On Wednesdays we were pink. The list literally just keeps going on and on. The benefit of knowing Mean Girls by heart is that if you and your partner decide to have sex for a bit, you can easily pick up the plot where you left off and the whole movie will still make sense to you. I mean, come on, what can I say about The Lion King that hasn't been said already? It's an animated masterpiece. It's a movie for all ages because it provides audiences with particularly adult themes in a film that's designed for children. It's such an emotional roller coaster ride featuring moments filled with happiness, triumph, and depression. The movie does such a great job of teaching you how to deal with grief while also teaching you how to live life and not have to take things too seriously in life all the time. Honestly, I just love every second of The Lion King. I loved it as a kid. I love it as an adult. I'll love it until my dying breath. But simply put, The Lion King is not just possibly the greatest animated movie of all time. It's one of the greatest movies of all time, period. American History X to me is such an important movie. I'll never forget watching it for the first time and being completely blown away. It really opened my eye to the world of racism and showing me how cruel human beings can be sometimes. It beautifully demonstrates the philosophy of hate as the story follows neo-Nazi Derek Vineyard, who was sentenced to 3 years in prison after killing 2 black men. Once he is released, he has to do everything he can to repair his life, his family, and preventing his brother Danny from going down the wrong path that he went before it's too late. Edward Norton's performance was absolutely remarkable as he completely envelopes the character of Derek Vineyard as we see him evolve from being a despicable racist in the first half of the film to becoming very wise and learning from all the mistakes of his old ways. American History X is a movie that will force you to open your eyes through harsh realism, and although there are some aspects about this movie that are a bit uncomfortable and disturbing, it'll definitely make you take notice. Yeah, this honestly shouldn't be surprising for any of y'all who are longtime viewers on my channel. Most of y'all are probably sick and tired of me gushing about Spider-Man 2, but I just want to let every single one of y'all know I don't give a shit because I adore every single thing about this film. The one aspect that I love so much about Spider-Man 2 is how humanizing its approaches its themes. At its core, it's a story about bearing the cost and moral obligation of responsibility. Spider-Man 2 beautifully explores this concept both patiently and emotionally in a way that centers around its character-driven narrative of Peter Parker, who struggles to balance his life with having a normal life while also being Spider-Man simultaneously. Despite it being a comic book movie, Spider-Man 2 chooses to prioritize substance over style, allowing the themes to drive the action rather than the other way around. Spider-Man 2 is a movie that I attribute to everything that I am today, a movie that has inspired me, motivated me. I can honestly keep going on forever of how much I love it, but all I'm trying to say is Spider-Man 2 was, is, and will forever be my #1 favorite movie of all time.